I'll show you. I had the wall here initially, and so that was destroyed by the very high tides in 2005. And I built this quite some time back, over the years, and that was destroyed. So I rebuilt it, and this one was destroyed in 2005.
Anote Tong is obsessed with the sea. He's the man in charge of a vanishing nation. The seas that have supported life here for 4,000 years are rising because of global climate change. It's Tong's job as president of his country to decide what to do.
For quite some time I did not sleep because I had no solution to a problem that nobody has a solution to. What happens to us as a people in the future? Do we disappear as a culture? So these are the issues that keep me awake.
Tong must decide the fate of his people. Should they stay and fight or evacuate their island home? Tong's nation is called Kiribati, 33 atoll islands stretching across the Pacific Ocean. 7 hours flight from Australia, 10 hours from the United States. They are strips of land on the edge of the world, so low that from the water they seem to vanish against the blue sea.
In Kiribati, it's very hard to see the next island. 10 kilometers out or even 15 kilometers out, you can no longer see land. So how we located this, we use the reflection from the clouds. So that's how we navigate. Over there is Mayana, the next most immediate, which is my island. So that's where I go fishing when I go trolling.
During an evening spent at his family home on the island of Tarawa, the country's capital, Tong admits he has little time to fish these days. He was first elected president in 2003. Since then, he's spent much of his time sounding the alarm internationally that his country is disappearing.
Already we have whole villages being washed out. There is no running away from the reality that the sea is rising. There is no running away from that reality.
It's a reality that appears to be getting worse by the day. A recent study from the University of Colorado estimates that even if carbon dioxide emissions are stabilized, sea levels will continue to rise as much as 2 meters by the end of this century. It's a trend that would spell disaster for his country's 108,000 residents, who live on narrow strips of land just 2 meters above sea level.
Regardless of what the measures are taken in regard to the reduction of emissions, the momentum of what's already in the atmosphere will carry on to the point that it will put us underwater.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that as greenhouse gases warm the planet, water expands, tides rise, and waves grow stronger. These images, shot during a storm in 2005, show what Tong and his people are fighting against.
If I didn't build this seawall, my house would be wiped out.
Over the last 10 years, Bob Tioram says he's had 2 houses destroyed. And each time, he's moved further inland to rebuild them, holding ground when others have fled.
For now, I believe I can hold the sea back. But if it gets much worse, I'll have to move again.
The problem has no boundary, has no border, because the land doesn't get any higher. 50 meters from where it was is as vulnerable as the 50 meters today. We really are not protected in any sustainable way at the moment.
Even so, the fight to protect land continues. Sea walls of every description dot the coastline.
If we had one single large island, I think it might be possible to put seawalls around it, but It's virtually an impossibility given the geography, structure, and the scatteredness of our islands. And so where does that leave us? We have to face the reality of it. And the reality seems to be that we have to relocate. The question is, how do we relocate?
Relocate, evacuate, but will his nation buy it? And will the world help? Tong takes his country's fight for survival to the United Nations.
Mr. President, on climate change, while the international community continues to point fingers at each other regarding responsibility for and leadership on this issue, our people continue to experience the impact of climate change and sea level rise.
Many nations continue to argue against immediate action. It's Tong's greatest frustration.
Here we were confronted with a number of countries wanting to achieve more economic growth and arguing the case that, of course, they must not be tied down to these stringent obligations. To me, it's offensive, it's insulting, because it's so insensitive about the fate of a people.
The people, says Tong, who are often forgotten when countries negotiate measures meant to combat climate change.
Even today, the world community has never made any commitment to deal with this issue. And this is the point of every speech that I make. You know, we are talking about the carbon trading, we're talking about everything else, but dealing with the people that will be affected. Even the polar bears are being considered, but not the people that would be affected. And so I think there needs to be this refocus of attention by the world community.
The people of Kiribati arrived on these islands 4,000 years ago. One of the last stops in humanity's migration out of Africa. The islands they settled stretch over an expanse of ocean the size of India. It's here at the most southern tip that fishermen like 23-year-old Rebita Yobite feel the threat of global climate change most. And it's here their president faces some of his greatest challenges.
The temperatures are getting hotter, and there's a change in the level of the sea. It's getting higher. These changes are affecting the food we grow. Before, our coconuts were big, but now they're as small as our fists.
Rebita says seawater has begun seeping into the water table. It gives the well water his mother draws each day a salty taste. The frequency and size of his catch has also become less predictable. And then there's his 83-year-old father, Yobite. He's declared war against the rising tide, building a seawall and then standing guard over it every evening.
I don't know why the waves are getting higher. All I know is that I can see that they are getting higher, and my trees are dying.
Yobite is typical of Tong's constituents. He knows little about the science and politics of climate change, just what he sees happening around him. He's heard that his island may soon be underwater and that his president says his family will have to leave. Yet he doesn't seem worried. Later, when his sons discuss the dilemma, it becomes apparent why.
The scientists say Kiribati will be under the ocean in 30 years' time. The big problem is that the seas are getting higher. So what do you think? Will we have to leave?
What does Father say?
He says he didn't believe it. There is a promise from God to Noah that the last flood was the last one, and there will not be another. And that's the truth that Father told them yesterday, that God has promised.
Kiribati is a highly religious society, and Tong's claim that the country is disappearing has generated a backlash.
For some time there was debate. Politically in Parliament they said, oh, this president doesn't believe in God because God has said there shall be no more flood. Nobody would ever believe that what God created, God would take away. And we had to talk to people to tell them that the science is there, regardless of whatever our religious beliefs might be. We have to take into consideration some of the science coming forward.
There is more understanding of the science, but many here still believe it is God who will save them.
My strong belief in God and understanding of the scripture is that there will be no flood. I believe everyone on the island will be safe, but with the help of others. And it is through God's hand that the others will come.
Tong has been invited to Geneva to take part in a forum on climate change organised by former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan. Although Tong holds a master's degree from the London School of Economics, this is his first opportunity to speak as president of Kiribati in Europe. So far, his speeches abroad have not generated the response he's hoped for. And back home, his permanent secretary says they can no longer wait for the world to act.
Now we can see, because there's little response from the outside world, that our president tries to switch the approach, and rather than continuing in appealing, now he decides to focus on a challenge.
The challenge is to make those countries contributing to climate change take responsibility for its effects. Across the island, the real impact of climate change, Tong believes, has been to make an already poor country even poorer. So before shutting the country down altogether, Tong needs to build up the economy. Otherwise, his people will suffer even greater hardships.
The reality is that there is the short-term issue and there's the long-term issue. The confusion that a lot of people make is to put these two together. For the next 30, 40 years, we still have to deal with our daily problems, our yearly problem, and so that must carry on. The idea is to encourage the development of the outer islands. There are people with more time to do it. We just need to be able to provide them with the opportunity, the skill, and whatever equipment they need.
Convincing development organisations to invest in a country that won't be around in 50 years is not easy. But Kiribati still has to feed itself. For the first time, the UN agency specialising in agricultural development, IFAD, sends a team to assess the situation on Kiribati's most remote southern island, Arore.
We would like to understand some of the challenges that you face with the environment. And is there any change that people have noticed in weather, in the sea?
Over the last few years, we've seen extreme changes in the environment. There has been a lot of damage to trees. Wells are salty. There is erosion along the coastline. And because we've had such little rain over the last few years, our crops are dying, and there is no fruit on the trees. These are things we can't fix ourselves.
Can I ask, how are you dealing with these problems? What is your strategy for coping with these changes in environment? If we think of what the President of the country is saying, that the whole survival of the islands over the next 50 years is in question. A challenge that we face is what happens in the course of this 50 years. We've heard from the communities themselves that they're struggling to feed themselves. So how do we respond to this is an enormous challenge, and I don't think there is an easy answer.
Tong still wants to develop the island and slow the impact of climate change. Hartman's group helps islanders develop a plan, one that tackles some of their most immediate problems, like the intrusion of seawater, but also breaks new ground for those living on the front lines of climate change.
Agricultural research, for instance, could contribute to improving soil fertility. Agricultural research could also contribute to developing crop varieties that they can grow in these areas that may increase productivity, so they move from subsistence to having just a little bit of surplus that they can sell for income generation. So food security is a critical issue here.
In the last few months, this agriculture research centre has been set up to help islanders produce food locally and buy time as conditions worsen. The aim is to identify food crop varieties able to tolerate rising temperatures and grow in salty water.
The overall goal is to enable people to produce their homegrown food using locally available material, and also to be able to produce yield given all these climate change impacts that we are coping with. Once these people in the community actually take part in all these coping strategies, I think the impact will be very, very minimal.
It's Tong's goal to turn islands like Ararai into centres for food production, growing crops that could help feed populations on other islands, where the impact of climate change is advancing much more quickly.
The battle against climate change is not lost, and small Pacific remote islands such as this one may in fact hold valuable lessons that have global importance as the whole world tries to deal with the changes to our planet.
It's investments like this that Tong is looking for at the conference in Geneva. But while he needs help easing hardship on his islands, he also needs help moving people off them.
The clock is ticking. Every year we delay, the greater the damage, the more extensive the human misery.
The conference is about the impact of climate change on people. It's a perfect opportunity for Tong to discuss when and how he should evacuate his country.
I'm very happy to be here. The long-term scenario, according to the projections, is that we would have at some time have to leave our islands.
Tong sounds the alarm, prompting a fellow panelist to raise the issue of climate justice.
That's exactly what we need today. It's climate justice for the climate refugees who will be lost, all because of industrialization and the overexploitation, which is not their own doing.
It's the chance Tong has been hoping for.
President Tong, could you pick up on that particular point? Give us some ideas. Put them on the table here.
Okay. I've got some ideas. In fact, we've already started programs in collaboration with the governments of Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand currently takes in 75 of our people on an annual basis as migrants. They're picked at random. If each country of this world would do that, I think we would solve our problem.
Right, let's pick up on more ideas from the audience.
This is exactly what Tong hopes will happen. Tong's strategy is to offer his people as skilled workers abroad, a unique, slow evacuation, one person at a time. He started by approaching his closest neighbours, New Zealand and Australia.
If you're going to ask somebody, would you take a couple hundred people on your front lawn? And the answer is no. But if a couple of thousand are going to slip through a work scheme and they will contribute to the companies that they work for, nobody is going to bother. And I think it's a win-win situation, and this is where it's more attractive.
Training centres like the Kiribati Institute of Technology are now aligning their curriculum with countries looking for skilled labour. But so far, the only real deal has been struck with Australia. These nursing students will be trained up, then eventually offered jobs in Australia.
And Australia is going to be a big place for us. Also, it's going to be a big assessment as well for us.
No, that's true.
Oh, miss my culture, of course. My country, the language, and maybe the food and the ocean. I think this is a good opportunity for me, not just for me, but I'm also the future of my family.
Only 80 will go this year, just a fraction of the thousands who'll need to be trained and move away in the future.
And are you worried about them?
Even so, Tong believes it's better than evacuating the islands all at once and creating a nation of climate change refugees.
This is the last thing that I want to put forward as an option for our people, because having lost our homeland, having lost our cultural identity, I don't think we want to lose our dignity. And so, in trying to put together options for putting this forward, we are proposing that we deal with the issue now. We don't wait until the 50 years' time when we have to move, but begin to get directly involved in policy schemes and systems already in place.
How can we get the powerful and rich people commit themselves also for the weak and the poor people?
Back in Geneva, the discussion moves on to other ways in which the global community can help vanishing states like Kiribati. And for a moment, Tong has a chance to dream.
I was in Japan quite recently, and they were talking and they showed me models of floating islands. And they cost about $2 billion. We would accept one of those islands for $2 billion, but can you find this to $2 billion? These are the questions.
Maybe you'll get a discount.
But maybe. But also the question of building up islands. That is an expensive exercise. And
Tong hopes that in some form, even if it's just one island, his nation will live on. Most people would have to be evacuated, but in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there would still be a place called Kiribati.
I think our hope in our hearts, there will always be this place called Kiribati. In physical terms, in geographical terms, I would like to be able to ask of the international community that, yes, we maintain some of these islands at least, to build them up so that there continues to be that place called Kiribati.
the last thing we want to do is leave the islands where we were born and where we wish to die. But given the option, what are those options?
I'm going to get to as many voices as possible. Aubrey Mayer.
You responded to the gentleman from Kiribati, suggesting that he might get a discount. I know it was a flip remark, but that actually speaks to the heart of the tragedy that we're already involved in. It is they who are providing the discount of their lives being lost to climate change.
The session in Geneva is over. Tong has played his cards. He's challenged the world to help him give his people the chance to leave their home with dignity. How does he feel he's done?
It's the commitment that I think we are still awaiting from the international community. We don't have that as yet. And so we need to have that.
Without such a commitment, Tong says, others are bound to suffer too.
We're gone, but somebody else is going to be gone next.
We will be victims regardless of what happens. And we're just the ones on the front line now. And I think the point is, if nothing is done, then other countries and other people will be next on the front line. When do we start to sacrifice our standards of living for the sake of the future of this planet? The biggest challenge that I want to throw is, what are you going to do about the people that have become victims? This represents the single biggest moral challenge to humankind. And if it doesn't respond to this, then there is no credibility to anything.
On the edge of the world, a nation's people wait. In just a few decades, they may have to leave these islands for good. And what was, 4,000 years ago, the end of humanity's global migration could see the start of its retreat.